The lights weren't just lights, they were a symphony. For 2 weeks, I'd spent every spare hour in the garage, soldering connections, programming microcontrollers, turning my quiet 2-story house into a silent orchestra. Little pinpricks of LED light, thousands of them, danced across the eaves and around the windows, flowing in time to a soft, instrumental Christmas carol only I could hear in my head. The air was crisp, smelling of pine from the wreath on the door, and the cold promise of snow. It was the first time in years I'd felt a flicker of that old holiday magic. This kind of thing. It's why channels like Karenology exist, you know? Because it's never just about the lights. You're about to find out what it was really about. A sharp, percussive knock rattled the front door. Not a friendly rap from a neighbor, but a summons. I opened it to find Carol, the president of our homeowners association. She was a woman built like a refrigerator, with tight blonde hair and eyes like little chips of ice. She clutched an iPad to her chest like a riot shield, and behind her, standing uncomfortably on my porch, was a uniformed police officer. "Evening to you too, Carol," I said, my voice drier than I intended. She ignored the pleasantry. Her gaze swept over my light display, a flicker of something ugly in her eyes. "Turn them off, now," she commanded. "This is a flagrant violation of the community's fire safety code and light pollution statutes." I leaned against the doorframe. I'm an IT network auditor. For 30 years, my entire job has been about rules, statutes, and codes. I know them inside and out. It's low-voltage LED, Carol. It draws less power than your microwave. And the light pollution is pointed at my own yard. $500 fine, she snapped, tapping her iPad. And it will be a new fine for every day they remain active. We will not have one person's reckless display jeopardizing the entire neighborhood. That's when the officer, a young guy named Miller, whose kid's bike I'd fixed last summer, finally spoke up. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Alex, I'm sorry," he mumbled, shifting his weight. "She's got the paperwork, an official inspection order, signed by the chief himself. My hands are tied." The chief? That was new? That was a different level of power. A cold feeling started to spread in my gut. It was a familiar cold, one I hadn't felt in years, not since the Cascade incident at my old firm. The time I missed one tiny vulnerability in a client's network, one line of code, a mistake that cost them millions and cost me my career. This felt just like that. The floor dropping out from under you because of a rule you didn't know existed. If you've ever had a neighbor who thinks they own the air you breathe, maybe hit that like button. You'll understand the feeling. I gave a slow nod, defeated. "All right, Miller. No trouble for you." I looked past him, straight at Carol. Her lips were curled into a faint, triumphant smirk. I shut the door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence. The music in my head had stopped. I walked over to the control panel and killed the power. Outside, my symphony went dark. My hand, trembling slightly, landed on my old network tester, sitting on the console table. It was a dusty, heavy thing, a relic from a past life. The screen was cracked from a fall years ago, a spiderweb of lines across the display. It was a constant reminder of my biggest failure. I stared at the dark screen, then out the window into the blackness where my lights used to be. But here's the thing about bullies like Carol. They never stop at one punch. They have to make sure you stay down. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was cold and official. Second notice of violation and escalated fine. I opened it. The fine wasn't $500 anymore. It was $1,500. The new charge? Unauthorized modification to the home's electrical grid. It cited a bylaw I had never seen, buried deep in an appendix of an addendum. It was nonsense, a complete fabrication. But it was official. And there was more. At the bottom of the email was a final petty twist of the knife, a small notification. Your access to the community online forum has been suspended pending review. I was cut off, silenced. I spent the day in a low-grade fury, drafting responses, looking up the county electrical codes. I knew I was right. I just had to prove it. But as dusk fell, a strange glow started to filter through my living room curtains. It wasn't my lights. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. My heart sank. On the sidewalk in front of my house, a small crowd of my neighbors had gathered, and in the center of them, holding a sheaf of papers and illuminated like a star performer, was Carol. She was pointing at my dark, lifeless house, her face a mask of righteous indignation. She was holding court. My trial had begun, and I wasn't even invited to my own defense. She was lit by the cold blue light of a dozen phone screens, and they were all pointed at my house. She was lit by the cold blue light of a dozen phone screens, and they were all pointed at my house. For a moment, I just stood there, a ghost in my own living room, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. You know that feeling when you're suddenly the main character in a story you never wanted to be a part of? I took a breath and walked outside. The cold hit me instantly, a physical slap. The crowd went quiet as I stepped onto my porch. There were about 15 of them, the Millers from across the street, the Hendersons, even old Mr. Gable, who rarely left his house. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, concern, and outright hostility. Carol's voice cut through the silence, loud and sharp. "Here he is now, the man who thinks his little hobby is more important than everyone else's safety." I kept my hands out of my pockets, trying to look non-threatening. "What is this, Carol?" "This," she said, waving a piece of paper from her stack, "is a printout of the regional power grid alerts. We've had 3 brownouts in the last 2 months. Our infrastructure is fragile. Your contraption," she gestured dismissively at my house, "could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. You want to be the reason we have no heat on Christmas morning?" It was brilliant in a twisted way. She wasn't just attacking me, she was positioning herself as the protector of the community, and me as the reckless villain. She'd found their fear and aimed it right at my front door. "That's not how it works," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My lights are all LED. They use a fraction of the power of a single electric oven. I have the load calculations right here." I started to pull my phone from my pocket. "We don't want to see your calculations," a man from the back shouted. It was Tom, the guy who ran a small online business from his home. An internet outage would be catastrophic for him. Carol had primed him perfectly. "We want to know the power is going to stay on." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. They weren't interested in facts. They were scared, and fear doesn't listen to reason. Have you ever tried to argue with a mob? It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. I felt a surge of hot, helpless anger. This was the Cascade incident all over again. A conference room full of executives, their faces grim, not listening to my explanations about the sophisticated, zero-day exploit I'd missed. They didn't care about the technical details. They just knew their data was gone, and it was my fault. I was the expert, the one who was supposed to protect them, and I had failed. Now, here on my own lawn, I was being cast in the same role, the irresponsible tech guy, the threat. The humiliation was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest. To be ostracized by the very people you share a street with, to be painted as a monster over a few strings of colored lights. It was a profound kind of loneliness. Carol took a step forward, lowering her voice into a tone of fake concern. "Alex, no one wants this to be difficult. Just pay the fine, take down the wiring, and we can all move on. It's for the good of the community." It was a checkmate. She was offering me a way out that was also a public surrender. If I agreed, I'd be admitting guilt. If I refused, I was the stubborn pariah, putting everyone at risk. I looked from her smug face to the anxious eyes of my neighbors. There was no winning here, not tonight. I gave a single tight nod, turned around without another word, and walked back into my house. I locked the door behind me, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. The muffled sound of the crowd dispersing felt louder than their accusations. I had been publicly tried and convicted. The war was over before I'd even fired a shot. Or so they thought. But as I stood there in the dark, a different feeling began to replace the shame. A cold, quiet, and very, very precise anger. An auditor's anger? She wanted to talk about the grid? Fine. We'd talk about the grid. I walked back to my study, the cracked screen of my old network tester catching the dim light. Her mistake wasn't in challenging me. It was in choosing the battlefield. Her mistake wasn't in challenging me. It was in choosing the battlefield. She thought she was talking about Christmas lights. I was about to make this about the very infrastructure she claimed to be protecting. The anger I felt wasn't the hot, messy kind anymore. It was cold and sharp, the kind that fuels you through all-nighters, sifting through lines of code for a single anomaly. First thing the next morning, I drove into town and stopped at a little dive bar on the outskirts called the Rusty Mug. It's the kind of place where the beer is cheap and the advice is free, if you know who to ask. I was looking for a guy named Mark. He's a retired lineman, a master electrician who spent 40 years working for the power company. He's forgotten more about the local grid than Carol will ever know. I found him at his usual corner stool, nursing a coffee. He's a wiry old guy with hands like leather and a permanent look of skepticism etched on his face. I slid onto the stool next to him and ordered a coffee of my own. "Heard you're the most dangerous man in the county, Alex," he grumbled without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the sports highlights playing on the TV. "Just trying to spread a little holiday cheer, Mark." He finally turned, his gaze sharp. Holiday cheer doesn't usually come with a $1,500 fine and a visit from the law. What's really going on? I told him everything. The lights, Carol, the fines, the bizarre accusation about overloading the grid. I laid it out fact by fact, just like I would in a security audit. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, just stirring his coffee. The only sounds were the clinking of his spoon against the ceramic and the low hum of the beer cooler. "It's strange," he finally said, his voice low. "This whole song and dance about the grid being fragile. It's not. Not this part of the county anyway. We laid new trunk lines out here 7 years ago." He took a sip of his coffee. "But something else is strange." I leaned in. "What?" "About 6 months back," he said, "the homeowners association made a big push, said everyone had to install these new surge protectors at their main panel, made by a company called Grid Safe. It was mandatory. They said it was to protect our appliances from the brownouts." The word mandatory hung in the air. In my line of work, mandatory single-source tech rollouts are a giant red flag. "Think about it," Mark continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The brownouts only started after everyone installed these things. We never had them before, not like this." He had just handed me the first thread, an anomaly. I felt that familiar thrill, the click in your brain, when a pattern starts to emerge from the noise. This was no longer about my lights. The lights were just the trigger. The real story was buried somewhere in the guts of our neighborhood's power system. "GridSafe," I repeated the name. "Ever hear of them?" Mark snorted. "Nope," popped up out of nowhere. "Seemed fishy then, seems fishier now." He finished his coffee and slid a crumpled napkin across the bar toward me. On it, he'd scribbled a number. "That's a guy I know in the county planning office. A kid, but he's sharp. Knows how to dig up incorporation papers and permits. Tell him Mark sent you." I folded the napkin and put it in my pocket. "Thanks, Mark. I owe you one." "Just find out what the hell is making my lights flicker," he grumbled, turning back to the TV. Driving home, my mind was racing. What were these grid-safe devices? Were they faulty? Or were they doing something else entirely, something they weren't supposed to be doing? I had a theory, a wild, half-formed idea that felt like it was hovering just at the edge of my thoughts. But to prove it, I couldn't just rely on paperwork. I needed data. Live data. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dug out my old professional-grade network sniffer and a set of induction clamps. Legally, I was only supposed to monitor the traffic on my own property line. So, that's exactly what I did. I wasn't looking at my neighbor's data. I was looking at the electrical noise, the background chatter of the grid itself as it flowed past my house. For hours, there was nothing but the usual hum of a suburban neighborhood at night. Fridges cycling on, TVs flickering, thermostats kicking in. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., I saw it. A synchronized surge of network activity. Not a big one. A tiny, almost imperceptible burst of data packets flowing out from the neighborhood. It was structured, it was rhythmic, and it was coming from every single house. It wasn't a glitch, it was a heartbeat, and it was a language I understood perfectly. My house, without its lights causing an anomaly, was now just part of the quiet, obedient herd. The herd was being sheared, and they didn't even know it. Carol hadn't just silenced me. She'd made me invisible, and that was the biggest mistake of all. That was the biggest mistake of all. An auditor's greatest strength isn't finding the problem, it's understanding the system so well that the problems reveal themselves. By forcing me to go dark, Carol had given me the perfect camouflage to watch the real system at work. The next day I made the call. The number Mark gave me connected to a young man in the county planning office named Kevin. He sounded perpetually bored until I mentioned Mark's name. "Oh, Mark's guy," he said, his voice suddenly alert. "Yeah, he called ahead, said you were looking into some grid anomalies. What do you need?" "A company called GridSafe," I said. I need their incorporation papers, business license, list of officers, anything you've got. There was a pause in the sound of typing. GridSafe. Got it. Interesting. They're new. Filed for an LLC about 8 months ago. Sole proprietor is a guy named David Miller. He paused again. Wait a second. The address listed for the business? It's a P.O. box, but the registered agent's address? That's right here in town, on Elm Street. My blood ran cold. I knew Elm Street. I knew who lived there. Kevin, I said slowly. Does the last name on that registration happen to be a very common one? Yeah, Miller, he said. David Miller. Any relation to our illustrious Homeowners Association president, Carol Miller? Her brother-in-law, I said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't just a bad business deal. This was a family affair. Can you email me everything you have on them? It's on its way, Kevin said. And Alex, be careful. This stinks. It did more than stink. It was a carefully constructed scheme. Carol uses her position on the board to make GridSafe's product mandatory. Her brother-in-law's company gets the exclusive contract. The money stays in the family. It was a classic grift, clean and simple. But it still didn't explain the 2 a.m. network traffic or the brownouts. The scam had to be deeper than just overpriced hardware. The paperwork arrived in my inbox moments later. It was all there in black and white, a textbook case of self-dealing and conflict of interest. For a moment, I felt a rush of victory. This was it. The silver bullet. I could take this to the next board meeting, expose her, and this whole nightmare would be over. You ever have that moment where you think you've won, where the path ahead seems clear and bright? That's usually right before the trap door opens. I requested a spot on the agenda for an emergency online board meeting. Citing the bylaws she herself had weaponized against me, they couldn't refuse. 2 nights later, I was looking at the faces of the 5 board members in little boxes on my computer screen. Carol was in the center, looking serene and confident. Alex, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, you have the floor. I hope this is more productive than our last conversation. I didn't waste time. I shared my screen and presented the documents, the incorporation papers for GridSafe, the address linking directly to her brother-in-law, the minutes from the meeting where she alone pushed the mandatory installation, recusing herself from the final vote in a pathetic attempt at creating plausible deniability. I laid it all out, cold and factual. I expected outrage, shock, demands for her resignation. I got silence. Then one of the board members, a man named Henderson, cleared his throat. Alex, this is disturbing, but Carol recused herself, and the board voted unanimously. We all thought it was a good idea for safety. Then Carol delivered the killing blow. I'm glad you brought this up, Alex, she said, her voice smooth as silk, because in your zeal, you seem to have committed a crime. She held up a document to her camera. It was a formal-looking report. I had a cybersecurity consultant review my personal network after I started feeling harassed by you. This report shows that my computer, my personal files, were accessed illegally from an IP address, registered to you. My mind went blank. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. I hadn't touched her network. What I think, she continued, her voice hardening, is that you couldn't accept the board's decision, so you decided to hack into my personal life to find dirt, to invent a conspiracy. You didn't find anything, so you fabricated this story. Suddenly, another face popped up on the screen, a new participant. It was Police Chief Davis, the man who had signed off on the initial inspection of my lights. Good evening, he said, his face grim. I'm here to confirm that we have received this report from Mrs. Miller, and based on the evidence provided by her security consultant, we are opening an official investigation into you, Mr. Evans, for felony computer crimes and harassment. It was a perfectly executed ambush. I was no longer the accuser. I was the accused. The documents I'd presented were now framed as the fruits of an illegal hack. My credibility was shattered. The truth had been turned into a weapon against me. The board members stared at me, their faces a mixture of fear and disgust. The chief's voice was the last thing I heard before Carol ended the meeting. I'd advise you not to leave town, Mr. Evans. The screen went black. I was left staring at my own reflection. I had walked right into her trap. I had the truth, but she had the story. And in this world, the story is always what wins. My phone buzzed on the desk. A new email. It was from my biggest freelance client. The subject, contract suspension. The witch hunt had begun. The screen went black. I was left staring at my own reflection, the faint, distorted image of a man who had just been publicly executed. The witch hunt hadn't just begun. It was in full swing. The email from my client was just the first domino to fall. By morning, 2 more had followed. My freelance work, the income that kept this roof over my head, had evaporated overnight. The story spread through the neighborhood like a virus. I was no longer the guy with the annoying Christmas lights. I was the neighborhood hacker, the creepy loner who stalks the homeowners association and president. People who used to wave now crossed the street to avoid me. I'd see curtains twitch as I got my mail. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell with glass walls. Have you ever felt that? The suffocating weight of being judged by everyone around you based on a lie you can't disprove. If you have, you know it's a special kind of hell. I spent 2 days in a fog of despair, replaying the meeting in my head. The fabricated logs, the chief's grim face, Carol's triumphant smile. It was a masterpiece of deception. She had used my own methods against me, twisting the very idea of digital evidence into a noose around my neck. Any document I produced would now be seen as proof of my guilt. I was legally radioactive. This is the point where most people would give up, sell the house, move away, start over. And believe me, the thought crossed my mind. Just pack it all up and run. But then I'd see the smug look on Carol's face in my mind's eye, and that cold, quiet anger would start to burn again. On the 3rd night, I was in my workshop, the garage, surrounded by the ghosts of projects past. I picked up a hammer, feeling its weight, wanting to smash something, anything. My server rack, holding terabytes of my life's work, seemed like a good target. One swing and I could just end this digital part of my life that had brought me so much grief. My gaze fell on the old network tester, sitting on the workbench. That cracked screen, that symbol of my greatest failure. I had failed because I trusted the documents, the reports, the official story. I had missed the real-world evidence right in front of me. And right then, something shifted. I put the hammer down. What if I was making the same mistake again? I was fighting Carol on her turf, the world of documents, allegations, and digital he said, she said. But the real crime wasn't on paper. The real crime was happening at 2 a.m. every night. It was a physical event. I grabbed the tester. It wasn't just a network tool. Its core function was to measure the physical properties of a signal, voltage, frequency, resistance, things that can't be faked with a photoshopped log file. I plugged it into a port I'd installed years ago, one that gave me a clean feed of the power line coming into my house, before it even hit my main breaker. I wasn't looking at data packets anymore. I was looking at the raw analog waveform of the electricity itself. For hours, it was a perfect clean sine wave, the steady 60-cycle hum of the American power grid. Then, at exactly 2:05 a.m., it happened. A tiny, almost invisible flicker, a microsecond of high-frequency noise. It was the physical signature of the data packets I'd seen before. But this time, I saw something else. Just before the noise, there was a minuscule drop in voltage, and just after, an equally tiny surge. It was a classic signature of an inductive load switching on and off, like a motor or a compressor, or, more to the point, a bank of processors. And then I saw the real key. The outgoing network traffic wasn't just random data. It was structured in a very specific way. The packets were encrypted, but the size and timing were unmistakable to anyone who's spent time in the darker corners of the internet. It was a standard hashing protocol. The pieces slammed together in my head with the force of a physical blow. These grid-safe boxes, they weren't just surge protectors. And they weren't just stealing a little bit of power. They were a distributed computer, a botnet made of hardware, hardwired into every house in the neighborhood. They were using our collective electricity to mine cryptocurrency. The brownouts weren't a sign of a fragile grid. The brownouts were the result of hundreds of these devices spinning up their processors at the exact same time every night, causing a sudden, massive power draw. It was elegant. It was audacious. And it was happening right under everyone's noses. Carol wasn't just a petty tyrant skimming a few thousand on hardware. She was running a secret, decentralized digital factory powered by her unwitting neighbors. My Christmas lights, with their unusual power signature, must have been an anomaly her system couldn't account for, a rogue element that had to be eliminated. It wasn't about the lights. It was about me being a loose end. A slow smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. I finally had it. Not a document that could be faked. Not an accusation that could be twisted. I had a physical fact, an immutable law of electronics. And now, I knew how to prove it. She thought she had buried me under a mountain of lies, but she didn't realize I had a shovel, and I was about to show everyone what was really buried underneath. She didn't realize I had a shovel, and I was about to show everyone what was really buried underneath. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt the ground firm up beneath my feet. I had a plan. It was risky, it was theatrical, and it had to be public. The annual Community Winter Safety Fair was scheduled for the upcoming Saturday. It was a cheesy event, usually held in the high school gymnasium, with booths from the fire department, the local sheriff's office, and of course, the homeowners association. This year, the theme was energy conservation and fire prevention. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was the perfect stage. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I called Mark, the retired lineman. Mark, I need a favor. I need to know the exact location of the primary transformer that feeds our subdivision, and I need a schematic of how it's wired. Playing with the big toys now, are we? He chuckled, but there was a note of respect in his voice. An hour later, a detailed schematic was in my inbox. Next, I worked on my presentation. I wasn't going to use documents. I was going to use a live demonstration. I wrote a simple piece of software, a visualizer that could take the raw data from my network tester and turn it into a real-time graph that anyone could understand. I would show them the electricity. I would make it visible. The day of the fair arrived, cold and gray. The school gym was noisy, filled with families and the smell of popcorn and stale coffee. I saw Carol at the Homeowners Association booth, right by the entrance. She was wearing a festive red sweater, handing out pamphlets on holiday fire safety. She saw me walk in, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face, quickly replaced by a smug, pitying smile. To her, I was a neutered threat, a sad man under criminal investigation. She had no idea I was a bomb waiting to go off. I walked past her booth without a word and found an empty table near the back. I set up my laptop, a large projector, and a screen. No one paid me any attention. I was just another guy with a table. The event droned on. A firefighter demonstrated how to use an extinguisher. A sheriff's deputy talked about locking your doors. Then, at noon, the moderator announced the main event. A Q&A session with the Homeowners Association Board on community resilience. Carol took the stage, flanked by the other board members. She launched into a polished speech about their proactive measures, their commitment to safety, and the unfortunate necessity of enforcing the rules to protect the grid. That was my cue. I stood up. "I have a question," I said, my voice ringing out in the suddenly quiet gym. All eyes turned to me. Carol's smile tightened. "Alex, this is not the forum for your personal grievances." "This isn't a grievance," I said, walking towards the stage. "It's a live demonstration of community resilience. You've been talking about the grid being fragile. I'd like to show everyone just how fragile it is, and why." Before she could stop me, I had plugged my laptop into the projector. The screen behind her flickered to life, showing a simple, clean graph. On the left, a label read, "Neighborhood Power Consumption." A single, mostly flat line moved across the screen in real time. "This is us," I said, my voice amplified by the gym's acoustics. "This is the power our neighborhood is using right now. Pretty stable, right?" A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Mark near the back, giving me a subtle nod. I saw my neighbors, the ones who had yelled at me on my lawn, looking confused but intrigued. Now, Carol and the board have told us that our grid is so fragile that a few Christmas lights could bring it down. But they also mandated that every home install a grid-safe surge protector to protect us. I looked directly at Carol. "What if I told you those boxes aren't protectors? What if they're the disease?" I pulled out my phone and tapped a single button. It sent a command to a small device I had secretly connected to the main breaker of my own house earlier that morning, a device that simulated the exact high-frequency signal I had recorded at 2 a.m. On the giant screen behind Carol, the graph convulsed. The flat line suddenly spiked, a huge, jagged peak that shot to the top of the chart. The lights in the gymnasium flickered violently. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "What you're seeing," I announced into the stunned silence, "is the physical proof. That signal just told every grid-safe device in this neighborhood to turn on. Not to protect you, but to start working, to start drawing a massive amount of power." I pulled up a second window on the screen. It was a live feed from a public cryptocurrency blockchain explorer, a specific mining pool. As the crowd watched, the hash rate, the processing power of that pool suddenly skyrocketed. "And this is what they're working on," I said, my voice low and steady. "They are using your electricity, which you pay for, to mine cryptocurrency for someone else's profit. The brownouts aren't an accident. They are a direct result of this system turning on every night. They're not a symptom of a weak grid. They're the evidence of a crime, a massive industrial-scale electricity theft happening right under our noses." The silence in the gym was absolute. Every eye was glued to the screen, watching the real-time proof of the heist. They were watching their own money being stolen, live on a 50-foot screen. The story was no longer about my lights. It was about their wallets. I turned off the simulation. The gym lights stabilized. The graph on the screen dropped back to normal. I looked at Carol. The color had drained from her face. Her smug confidence had shattered, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. There were no documents to fake, no lies to spin. The electricity itself had testified against her, and 100 witnesses had just seen it happen. The electricity itself had testified against her, and 100 witnesses had just seen it happen. The gym was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, a single person started to clap. It was Mark. Then, another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause, not for me, but for the raw, undeniable truth they had just witnessed. Carol stood frozen on the stage, a deer in the headlights of 100 angry glares. Her carefully constructed world of rules, committees, and intimidation had just been vaporized by a single line on a graph. The crowd wasn't a mob against me anymore. It was a mob against her. Tom, the man who had yelled at me, was now pointing at her, his face red with rage. "You did this? You caused the brownouts that nearly ruined my business?" That's when Chief Davis, who had been standing silently at the back of the gym, began to walk forward. His face was unreadable. I wasn't sure if he was coming to arrest me or her. This was the moment of truth. He had backed her before. But 100 angry voters and a mountain of undeniable public evidence is a hard thing for an elected official to ignore. He stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at Carol. He didn't even glance at me. "Carol," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the gym, "I think you and I need to have a conversation, downtown." It was the calmest, most devastating arrest I had ever seen. He didn't even need handcuffs. Her reign was over. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The state's attorney's office got involved. The grid-safe devices were declared illegal, and a class action lawsuit was filed to recover the cost of the stolen electricity, which was estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The criminal investigation against me was dropped so fast, it probably left a sonic boom. A few weeks later, the community held a meeting to elect a new homeowners association board. They asked me to run. I politely declined. I had no interest in being a king. I just wanted to be left alone. Instead, I nominated Mark. He grumbled about it, but he accepted. The neighborhood needed a protector, and he was the right man for the job. They offered me a choice. The board, under new management, suggested that I could take a significant cut of the recovered funds from the lawsuit as a consulting fee for uncovering the fraud. It was a lot of money, enough to retire on. It was the easy button. But I thought about it. I looked at my neighbors who were finally talking to each other again, working together to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. I thought about the principle of the thing. This was never about money. It was about a bully who thought she was above the rules. Taking a payoff felt wrong, like it would taint the victory. So I made a counteroffer. Use the money to create a community-owned and managed energy co-op. Buy our own transformer, install solar panels on the community center roof, and create a truly resilient, independent grid, free from the whims of any single power company or corrupt board. Make us self-sufficient. Gus? They agreed. The victory felt clean. It felt right. But every win comes with a price. A few days after the fair, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. It was my old boss, the CEO from the company where the Cascade incident happened. He had seen my story on the local news. "I'll be damned, Alex," he said. "You're still a magician and a brawler. I was wrong about you all those years ago. You didn't just find the problem, you exposed the system." He paused. "We need someone like you. The offer to come back is on the table. Name your price." 10 years ago, that phone call would have been my ultimate vindication. But now, I looked around my quiet house. I looked at the old, cracked network tester sitting on my mantelpiece, not as a symbol of failure anymore, but as a trophy. A reminder that some truths aren't found on a spreadsheet. "Thanks for the offer," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm good right here." I hung up. I had won. I had cleared my name. I had brought a community together, but in the process, I had become something else. I wasn't just Alex, the quiet IT guy anymore. I was the man who could see through walls, the one who understood the systems that run our lives. And that kind of knowledge is a lonely thing. The neighbors were friendly now, but there was a new distance, a kind of awe that felt a lot like fear. They knew I could see things they couldn't. That evening, I walked outside. The air was cold, and a light snow was beginning to fall. I went into the garage, pulled out the boxes of lights, and began to string them up again. This time, no one would dare to say a word. The lights flickered on, a silent, colorful symphony in the winter twilight. And as I stood there watching them, I had to wonder. What do you do when you win the war? But in doing so, you build a fortress around yourself that no one else can enter. Let me know what you think in the comments. It's a question I'm still trying to answer.